Good morning, everybody. My name is Grossman. I'm with the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality. Some of you I've worked with in the past, some of you are new faces for me. I've been with the department for 17 years now, basically doing the erosion control, construction stormwater permit, those type of things for the department. I do have other roles in basically dealing with inspections, enforcements, those type of things, working on permits for other types of facilities, industrial facilities, coal mining operations, gravel pits, quarry pits, just kind of all over the place. What we're going to cover today is basically the construction stormwater permit. I'll give you a little bit of why we have to do it, where it kind of comes in, how the rules translate down from, say on the national level into what goes on your projects, and then just talk a little bit about erosion, sediment controls that are out there, what we see, particularly in the Red River Valley, and just kind of, the paperwork side on it. Again, feel free to ask me questions throughout. If you have any questions in something specific to, say, the city in the area, I guess feel free to ask them also. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so if you want to hold your questions till then, that's fine. So just to give a plug about the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality, our mission is a sustainable, high-quality environment for current and future generations. Our mission is to conserve and protect the quality of North Dakota's air, land, and water resources following the science and the law. So we are the Department of Environmental Quality. A lot of people still call us the Department of Health. Back in 2019, we basically the environmental health section of the Department of Health was split off from that department and became its own agency, the Department of Environmental Quality. So that was through the governor's decree, and so we are now a standalone agency. You can still call us a Department of Health. People still do. So, but we are new, like I said, the DEQ. So what is a construction stormwater permit? So basically, these are the requirements. That's basically requirements to minimize pollution from your construction site. So we're not saying you can't have any pollution coming from construction. We just want to minimize what's coming off of that. Now that's whether it's dirt coming off, oil, trash, those type of things. This goes with, as far as the work that you would do, would be either residential project, commercial project, any street project, utility project, those type of things. And so this permit covers all sorts of construction activity. So if you look through the general permit, there are certain aspects that would deal with, say a large road project, like a DOT project or a county road project. All those types of projects covered by this permit also. Same thing with pipeline developments, oil well development, those type of things. So it's all covered under this permit. Pretty much the permit is written to reduce erosion from a site. If there is any dirt, just to control that and keep it on site. If it does get off site, bring it back on site, and then just stabilize the area once the work is done. It also is essentially just keeping a clean and orderly site. So, how do you manage your chemicals, your fuels, any of those type of things. So the permit exists because it comes down from the Clean Water Act. And so the Clean Water Act, essentially this was back in the 70s. Clean Water Act established a permitting process for what was considered a point source of pollution. Construction activity was eventually defined as a point source of pollution. It's one of those where you can, if there is something, if it does rain and it starts washing material off the site, you could point to a construction site and say that is where the source of pollution is coming from. Does not include agricultural land. Agricultural land is exempt. That is considered a non-point source of pollution, and so that therefore a permit is not required for them. So the way it comes down then is in the federal rules. It says, here is what we expect from a construction site. And then through that, EPA develops their permitting process and their permit that is used kind of as the national guidance for how others should develop their, or states should develop their permits. And then in the state rules, we basically say we will incorporate the federal rules as written, not necessarily EPA's permit, but we incorporate the federal rules. And then we would look at EPA's permit and say, okay, here's basically the template, you know, what is applicable to our state, what is not applicable to our state. Why is the permit important? Basically, keeping dirt and other pollutants from leaving the project. Again, this is just to minimize pollution from your activity. Keeping the dirt out of the storm sewer systems, drainage ditches, rivers and streams. For a lot of the stuff, you know, really the most, you know, rivers and streams are important. But for what you're looking at, as far as like infrastructure and flooding issues and those type of things, you know, you'll look at it as keeping that storm sewer system clean, keeping those ditches, drainage ditches clean. I'll do a lot of talking the North Dakota side, basically because that's what I am familiar with. There is obviously work on the other side of the river in Minnesota. So that, just keep in mind that that is a different agency. That is a different permit that you would operate under versus the state of North Dakota's permit. There is involvement of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, but again, those are two different regions. So the Red River basically splits. We're in Region 8 in North Dakota. Region 8 is based out of Denver, and I believe it's Region 5 on the Minnesota side, and I believe they're out of Chicago. Someone can correct me. Okay, yep, out of Chicago. So two different EPA regions. But again, I'll talk about the North Dakota side, the North Dakota stormwater permit. There's also local jurisdictions that are involved with some of the activity that you do. So we have what's called in urbanized areas, we have permits for, say, or the city of West Fargo, city of Fargo, city of Horace have a permit with the Department of Environmental Quality, and this is called their MS4 permit. And so part of that MS4 permit basically says that they have to develop an erosion and sediment control program for construction activities. So that's where you will get, you start with the state involvement, and then you also have the local involvement. That's because they have a permit with the DEQ to say they're going to do or have that program. Again, that is just in the urbanized areas. When you get into areas not considered urbanized, those are the unregulated MS4 communities. So if you're doing work in Castleton, Mapleton, Kindred, you know, other small towns that are out there, you're basically under the authority of the Department of Environmental Quality and subsequently EPA. So EPA's involvement in the program is basically the ultimate oversight agency. So they have delegated basically the erosion and sediment control and the stormwater permitting requirements to the state of North Dakota. And our delegation originally started back in 1975, you know, with the stormwater rules coming into play. That was in the early 90s and early 2000s. But essentially they have oversight of us. It's important to know that because if you are on a site and you do get an inspection, you could get an inspection from the DEQ, you could get an inspection from EPA, or both doing a joint inspection. It's always good to find out who is leading that inspection or what type of inspection that is, because then that helps with the type of agency or which agency you're going to deal with as part of that inspection. If it's an EPA-led inspection, then EPA would be, doing the inspection. DEQ would also be doing the inspection, and what your conversations would be with EPA. If it's a DEQ-led inspection, then DEQ is doing the inspection. They're also inspecting, but DEQ is the agency you're dealing with. If it's an oversight inspection, that is basically the DEQ is doing the inspection of your site, but EPA is inspecting the DEQ doing the inspection of your site. So there you would just have involvement with the Department of Environmental Quality. But again, they are the oversight agency. Penalties, just gonna touch on these. So under our state rules or the state of North Dakota rules, we have the ability to issue a penalty up to $12,500 per violation per day. That's in our Century Code 6128. Again, that's up to that 12,500. So when you talk about, what goes into calculating a penalty, we don't have like a flat fee for, say, not having a stormwater pollution prevention plan, for tracking mud out, for not having a silt fence or not doing maintenance on a silt fence. Our fee is basically calculated based on severity of the violation, the damage of the violation, is how significant of a pollutant coming off of the site is it? Is it dirt versus like some kind of toxic chemical type thing? How quickly did you come back into compliance? Was it something where you quickly recognized that you are not in compliance and you corrected your action, or is it something where we had to basically order you back into compliance? So that's why I say we don't have what is out, a flat fee that is out there. Ours is basically calculated on a scale. We also, the other thing that gets calculated is if you're kind of a repeat violator, then that is also another metric that gets put into that penalty calculation that could potentially increase it. On the federal level, there's, this is their current, I guess, limits on what they can find up to. It's $59,973, and this is more for basically their administrative penalties. This gets updated every year. So last year it was, I believe, 56,000 something. But this gets adjusted, like I said, each year. You can find online what they have as far as their penalty matrix. So I think common ones like a SWIP is like $5,000 for a penalty. Where they'll say how much the silt fence is and such. But when they use that penalty matrix, they have a cap on it. So if they say if you've racked up more than a certain dollar amount of penalties, then this penalty matrix is taken away, and they're basically going the route that pretty much I explained, where you're looking at more, or it's not a flat line, I guess, item for a penalty. So who does the permit effect? Pretty much anyone that's involved with a construction project, whether it's the builders, any of the people doing the excavating, bringing in concrete or other building material, all the subcontractors, the developers, the cities, their contractors, pretty much anyone that's going to be involved in a new or an area that's being built. So as far as projects that have to have a state stormwater permit, it's essentially any project that disturbs 1 or more acres. So that's, if you think of a road projects, say like a county road project or a DOT project or something like that, if they disturb more than an acre, they're going to have it. A development in itself, if it disturbs more than an acre, has to have a permit. But it also includes anything that disturbs less than an acre that is part of a larger common plan of development that disturbed 1 or more acres. And so that's where we get into the example of residential projects or small commercial projects. Even if that residential project is, say, like 0.2 acres, if the overall development disturbed an acre or more, then that 0.2 acre lot has to essentially have a permit, has to have a pollution prevention plan, is subject to the inspections and all that stuff. And that basically would go until what we would consider the larger common plan of development no longer needing a permit. These permits can go on for years. We have, I think there recently it was in, we had a residential development that terminated their permit, and the permit I think had been active for roughly around 15 years. So it does go through a couple of permit cycles and things like that, but until that project meets the definition of final stabilization, a permit has to be in place. We've also had permits for an oil, I remember that it's an oil well or a couple of oil wells that they couldn't meet the definition of final stabilization. They just couldn't get grass to grow out there and things like that. Again, that permit was open for more than 15 years before they actually could get grass to go for growth. So these can be around for quite a long time, and we expect it. Most projects, most residential projects that we get into as far as like home building, usually about less than a year, maybe 6 months to a year. If you get into commercial projects, we're probably looking at about a year or two before you could consider it basically final stabilization. And when we talk about final stabilization, that's kind of the end point. So unless you're out there sodding or doing something else to basically get grass growing, once construction ends, that doesn't necessarily end the requirement of the permit. The permit has to stay until basically grass is growing out there. So as far as projects that need it, basically I kind of gave or touched a little bit on some of those, but home building projects, commercial sites, developments, city projects, they all need coverage under the construction stormwater permit. And that's if they fall underneath if you get into, say, a standalone city project or a standalone commercial site, and it's, let's see, and it's, say, over or less than an acre, then that doesn't necessarily need a permit from us. So if you had, say, a small lot downtown that is less than an acre, there isn't any other part of the larger common plan in that area, then that permit or that site would not need a permit from the DEQ, but it might need something from the city. So not to say that there isn't any other requirements out there, because the local municipality or a local regulatory community or MS4 could have erosion sediment control requirements for that site. Same thing if it's a city street project that is, downtown and it's less than an acre in size, that wouldn't necessarily need a permit from the DEQ because it's not a regulated type of activity. Now, if it was a project that, again, is in a new development that's less than an acre, then that would need a permit from the DEQ. So basically, as far as the site requirements, as far as your erosion and sediment controls, there really is no one set thing that we say you have to do on a project. If you look through the permit, it basically says use a combination of erosion, sediment controls, whatever you want to do, just minimize the dirt or pollution that's coming off your site. So when we talk about when I first started, it was always use silt fence, put up silt fence everywhere. And then no one would ever take down the silt fence, or the silt fence would blow all over the place. Well, then we were finding other methods or other ways to basically make a site look better. It wasn't necessarily just having silt fence out there. It was, you could have a straw wattle that was put along the edge. There's some maintenance or different types of maintenance issue than the silt fence, but they could do that. Then you started seeing that the boulevard area or the vegetation in the boulevard could act as a sediment control. So you started to see a lot more of the projects. If there was a vegetated boulevard, then they would not disturb that boulevard. Or if they did disturb it, they would try to save as much as they could, but then keep in like a straw wattle or a silt fence in that area. The other things that we talk about too is inlet protection is always a big one. Inlet protection always in this area will be removed at say the end of the construction season or before winter, and then put back in the spring essentially. That is fine. However, the state's permit says you have to, if you remove that inlet protection, you need to have other things back on the lots to make sure you're controlling that dirt back on the lot, or you're doing other things to make sure you're not getting, if you do get dirt into the street, that it's not getting down that storm sewer inlet if it was to melt or get a rain event or something like that. We also say you have to stabilize a site. It's pretty, when we talk about stabilization, we do define it in the permit. We basically say that grass seeding alone is not stabilization. So you can't just plant grass and wait for it to grow and call it stabilized. You have to use something else such as mulch, hydromulch, some other material basically to keep soil in place to call it stabilized. If you don't use that, or if you do just seed the site and you're not basically getting anything to grow at that point, or not putting out mulch or sod or whatever, then you're not considered stabilized. We also let's see, kind of lost my train of thought here. We also talk about track out. The permit doesn't say that you have to use a specific track out device to keep dirt from getting into the street. It basically says you have to use a combination of methods essentially to, one, minimize the amount of dirt that you track onto the street, and if you do track onto the street, how are you going to clean it up, type thing. So we do, we say it a lot that just speed and cleaning up a site is the best management practice. That's erosion control, or not erosion control, it's a sediment control. So here's just examples of some of the things that were out there. As far as like site requirements, we could be looking at this as being a stabilized. The picture on the left is, well, it's both the same project, but picture on the left, you basically have the development. Here's a lot someone's going to come in and build on. You probably have some vegetation growing, whether it's intended, whether this is volunteer growth of weeds or whatever. It still does minimize erosion on the site. It does minimize actually what is getting out. There is dirt in the curb and gutter, but it's minimized basically from what's going on. Now you're coming in and on the right-hand side and, starting to do work, starting to do their excavation, still maintaining the perimeter vegetation or the perimeter controls. So, this overall, if we were looking at it, would look like a site that meets the requirements of the DEQ's permit. We wouldn't have any issues with this. Here's just, some more examples. One of the things that we run into is on the left-hand side, this is more of an example of people getting their final landscaping in. Someone's starting to put lawns in, things like that. One of the things with the DEQ's permit is that we do not regulate occupied residents. So if this becomes, say on the left-hand side, if it becomes an occupied home, then the DEQ's authority is no longer involved. Even if they don't have a lawn established, even if they have dirt that could run off the project, we have no involvement at that point. You probably have some involvement on the local levels as far as like controls that they would require, or establishing lawns in a certain timeline. But for the DEQ, we're done. If say this wasn't an occupied home, then we would still have involvement, even if landscaping was going on. So if this is the house is being built, and for some reason it's not, it goes beyond the timelines of stabilization or things like that, we would still expect a pollution prevention plan for that site. You got on the picture on the right-hand side, this just is an example of how a different control can be used. So in this, right behind on the right-hand side, right behind the curb is just like a little dip. So it's like what we would consider a sediment trap. So if there is any runoff and it was to go towards the street, it would go down into this little dip area, which, it's hard to see, but it's there. But it would go in that area, water would pool in that area. If there is anything that is picked up as far as dirt, then as far as erosion, then that would just settle out in that area. A lot of the things that we see in the Red River Valley aren't necessarily caused by an actual erosion or rain event or things like that. It's more the
equipment, vehicles, delivery, coming off of the site, getting onto the street, tracking mud onto the street, and then you're not seeing there isn't any cleanup activity after that. So that's really where we see a lot of the issues versus an actual erosion issue. But this is, like I said, a type of control that is being used. And again, it's in the stage of construction. So, I mean, you're looking at the streets going in, and all the lots at this point are still, say, below grade of the street, and then you have to build up all the lots. So as you're building up the site and doing different stages of the site, you're looking at different controls that may have to be used. And it all kind of goes back to what you're putting together for a stormwater pollution prevention plan. So one of the requirements of the permit is to put together the stormwater pollution prevention plan. Essentially, it's a pollution plan for construction activity. And so that is where you're planning for these different stages of a project. And as you're going through a project, and as the site changes, you're planning for that next phase or that change. And then what is it going to be your next BMP? What am I doing now? Is this going to work when we get to this point? Is it going to work when we get to this? Or the second thing that I did, is that going to work when I get to another point? How does this all change? We do talk about it too, that as far as the pollution prevention plan, it doesn't necessarily have to be installing, going back to this picture on the right-hand side, it doesn't necessarily have to be installing or maybe on the left-hand side, a control along this way. If they establish or come in and do the final landscaping, say in a day, and they can come in and hydrovulch that lawn within a day, and there isn't any chance of rain or anything in the forecast, then that's stabilized, and they use speed. And so speed is a BMP that you can use. So that's all stuff that can be planned out. Yeah, here's just an example of erosion control blanket placed along the curb. So again, that's another example of BMP that can be used. Basically, what they're looking at is a sediment control. If there is any runoff that comes through and is running off of the lot, then that would have to pass over intended to pass over the control and then drop out any dirt, or the blanket would catch any dirt that's leaving the site, or minimize the amount of dirt that's leaving the site. I shouldn't say catch, we're just minimizing what's coming off of the site. So here we're just kind of examples of dirt getting onto the street. This would be an instance where we'd have to have this cleaned up. Say if this were to occur, the permit says clean it up by the end of the workday, or a time frame specified by the local authorities. So if the city has a quicker time frame for cleaning up the streets, then you would have to clean up streets in that time frame. For this, we get asked a lot. It's like, how clean is clean? And the cities might have a different view of how clean is clean. For us, if you had to take a shovel to this, then that would be considered dirty. If it comes to, basically, you can see that if you can see that there was a remnant of dirt in the street, but there isn't actually any dirt that you can't sweep up or pick up with a broom, then that would be basically a clean street. That's what we're talking about for removing dirt from the street. In this case, too, on the right-hand side, there's the storm sewer inlet that is next to the project. It may not necessarily be part of the project, but that is an instance where this disturbed lot, or this lot where, say, there isn't, where there's starting activity on, would have to protect that storm sewer inlet. Now, when we say protect that storm sewer inlet, they could either have stormwater inlet protection or keep the dirt back on the lot. So if you keep it on the lot, then you don't have to worry about protecting the inlet. Or there's less concern about using a control at that inlet.
Again, here's just another example of a site and with the controls we got in place. There's inlet protection. Probably would like to see more along the perimeter in this instance. But that's just some of the things we see. It's construction activity. There's going to be dirt coming off of the site. These aren't going to be, you're not going to never have dirt coming off of the construction project, but it's just the way it is. Again, here's just another example or another photo for this one. Here, I would say, they got the landscaping in, they got the straw wattle in place. Again, this would just need to come in at the end of the day and clean up the street. And, it does depend on the time of the day. When we look at these photos, the time of the day that the DEQ shows up and looks at a site. Again, we give you till the end of the day. If we were to come back, say the next day and see that there's still dirt on the street, then we'd be looking at, here's an issue. You're not following the requirements of the permit at that point. And when we say the end of the day too, back here, when we say the end of the day, it's the end of your work day. What is the end of your business day? It's not the end of, say, the DEQ's business day. So if you work late into the evening and, say in the summertime and you're cleaning up, in the evening, then that is your work day or end of your business day. Stabilization requirements. So any project that does have any disturbance has to be stabilized, and we do have basically it's considered rapid stabilization requirements. This is something that basically comes down from EPA's permit, and what it essentially says is that if you're going to permanently or temporarily cease construction on a site, then you got to stabilize it. And that stabilization has to be initiated immediately. So essentially a phone call is initiating the stabilization, and it has to be completed within 14 days. So if you have temporarily, and that's not 14 days from initiation, that's 14 days from temporarily or permanently ceasing construction activity. So when we get into residential construction and you're looking at a home and it becomes occupied and things like that, do you have to establish a lawn for someone? Do you not have to establish a lawn for someone? What happens in the winter? Those type of things. There is some nuances that you can use to your advantage or that you can follow to meet those requirements. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but it isn't just as cut and for residential construction, it isn't just cut and dry, like do this and in 14 days do this, because you could have some time frames that this isn't going to fall into. When you get into, say, a commercial project, something like that, it's essentially going to be when equipment is no longer running around on that project. That would pretty much be the temporarily or permanently ceasing construction activities. So you'd be, if it gets to the point where you're done working, they're coming in with the landscaping and everything, and finish that up, then basically you've got the stabilization requirements, as long as you're following into these time frames. So again, too, when we talk about stabilized, doesn't necessarily have to be a finished lawn or anything like that. It could be something that is just erosion control blankets put down, or straw mulch. You see that in some areas where, or some developments or road projects or things like that, where we'll come in and put down straw mulch or do some other way to basically make sure that there isn't any erosion from the site, and that's considered stabilized. Grass seeding, like I mentioned, grass seeding alone is not considered stabilized. So you do have to do some other, employ some other methods to get stabilization. Snow cover and frozen ground is not considered stabilized. There isn't a lot of snow that's out there, say here. I mean, there's a little more snow up north, but if you get out into like the Bismarck area, we were already running into issues with runoff coming off of projects and stuff because our snow has basically disappeared. Or this January or February, we got a ½ inch of rain that froze, and then went and we got 30 to 50 degree days that melted all that stuff. And so we started having runoff issues right away this year. So that's where we say the snow cover and frozen ground is not considered stabilized, because if it does snow on it, and spring does come around, then as that snow is melting, eventually it's going to get a point to where it's going to start eroding material off of the site. And so if the site wasn't stabilized prior winter, then you're going to have sediment issues from that site. If there is, and we say a lot with a lot of projects, since it's not considered, the frozen ground and snow cover is not considered stabilized, we still say you have to stabilize that site, even if it is winter. We've had sites that have had to do winter stabilization, into December. I think one was close to Christmas time, where they had to go in and put down stabilization because they had to meet those requirements. If you do run into an instance where you cannot stabilize a site for some reason beyond your control, then you basically have to put together a stabilization plan. And that essentially is going to be like, okay, whenever we get a chance to stabilize it, we're gonna stabilize these areas. But again, now you have to document that it was beyond your control to stabilize that site. That goes back to the pollution prevention plan. And the pollution prevention plan basically says you have to consider seasonal changes. We all know that winter's coming, so we should plan for stabilizing a site before winter gets there. As far as things that are exempt from stabilization, you don't have to worry about rock, sand, or demolition concrete stockpiles having to be stabilized. We're not asking you to go out and spray these with hydromulch or anything. Those are exempt requirements. But stockpiles do have to have effective sediment controls. It cannot be placed in curb and gutter or ditches. I should explain one thing as far as like the what is a water of the state. By definition, for the DEQ, and this is in the state rules, the curb and gutter essentially is a water of the state. Now, when we operate as the DEQ and under that rule, that is our definition. So if anyone's worked with the State Water Commission, they have a different definition of a water of the state. So it's two separate state rules. If you heard of the discussion of waters of the U.S. and the back and forth with that, that is a different definition than a water of the state. So as far as what we look at for the DEQ, we're protecting the water of the state. And when we look at what we have to keep as far as dirt and those type of things out of waters of the state, that's where we have to incorporate this to say, do not put your dirt into the curb and gutter or even ditches, because that is a water of the state. So here's just an example of a sediment control for a soil stockpile. Don't so much look at the boulevard. That's a different issue. Different requirement of the permit. The requirement of the permit of having a sediment control for the stockpile is being met. Here is just an example of a combination of controls that can be used. So you have the soil stockpiles. They do have a silt fence that's in place. They installed it on a vegetated area, or we would consider this somewhat of a vegetative buffer in some instances, kind of about right in the middle, maybe not so much. But here they're looking at, it's a combination of controls to keep sediment on the site.
Dallas, if you go back 2 slides, past that concrete structure there, Is a vegetative buffer an adequate control for a stockpile?
Let's see, what's the requirement? Oops, let me go, sorry, went the wrong way.
You have to have so many feet.
Yes, so. So we do say for a vegetative buffer, you have to have 1 foot of vegetative buffer for every 5 feet of disturbance or disturbed area that goes to this. In this case, I would say, looking at that buffer, and again, there's probably more requirements out there that can ensure this is adequate. But you probably wouldn't need that straw wattle going into that vegetated area. But with that said, the permit says you have to protect up to a 2-inch rain event. So if there is, you basically, that vegetative buffer, if it does rain, say like 2 inches on this site, and you do observe dirt coming off the site, even with this vegetative buffer in place and not having that straw wattle in place, then you would have to update your plan to then go, nope, our buffer wasn't adequate enough. We got to put in a straw wattle, if that makes sense. So our permit is protective only so much. So it's protected up to what we call the 2-year 24-hour storm event. And so the 2-year 24-hour storm event is, going across the state. That's essentially, in this part of the state, a little more than 2 inches of rain in 24 hours. In Bismarck, it's right around that 2-inch in 24 hours. And west part of the state is about 1.7 inches in 24 hours. So what we say is, basically, if you are putting in controls, say in this instance, if you do have the straw wattle, if you do have, if you go back behind the concrete structure, have that vegetative buffer, then that would have to control erosion or sediment coming off your site for a 2-inch rain. If you get above that, if you get like a 10-year storm event, 100-year storm event, 500-year storm event, that's above and beyond what the permit is intended to address. So there is where the permit shifts from, controlling dirt on site to get as much dirt back on your site, get your site back in order type situation. So we do allow for timelines for that to happen. And that's a lot of things that you'll find in the permit is that we don't expect everything to be perfect out there. We're not trying to, try to control all the activity. We can't prepare for every single thing that's out there, but we'll do certain things up front. And if something happens that we cross like a line or a threshold, then it's more of that reaction, clean up the site. You have so many days to clean up the site. You have so many, so much time to address issues. And then you'll start to see that there's a lot of that documentation that comes into play. So you have the plan that said, here's what we were preparing for. Here's what happened. Now we got to document that this actually happened, whether it's through, in your plan or if it's in your inspection records, things like that. And then here's how we corrected it. So, and we'll talk about that too, as far as inspections of the site, because there are regular inspections that you would have to do of your project. So in this instance, if you did your inspection and you did notice that even say like a 1/2-inch rain caused dirt to come off of the stockpile, and again, if there wasn't any straw wattle there, it went into the vegetative buffer and got out into the street, then if that was caused by a 1/2-inch rain, then your plan is inadequate. Then you would have to go and modify your plan, which would essentially be, okay, I need more controls in place. And then pretty much go on from there. So. Downspouts, pretty straightforward. You say you have to have splash pads and or downspout extensions for roof drains. Getting into this example here, the idea being that we were controlling the erosion coming from the roof drains, going across the properties. We do say, you gotta follow the local regulations as far as putting anything across any sidewalk or placing something on a boulevard, those type of things. As far as, you know, putting a downspout, like a pipe across the sidewalk, or discharging the downspout onto the basically the paved area of the sidewalk. You know, those you have to basically still follow your local requirements as far as, you know, where can that water be placed. We do say, or we, if it is an instance where you're going to have some kind of issue where you can't, you know, say there's another regulation that prevents you from following a certain requirement of the permit, again, you have to document that in your SWIP or in your pollution prevention plan. As far as this instance, you know, what I would say is that if you did have, you know, and this time of year too, I mean, it kind of depends on the time of year also. If you're getting to time of year where things can freeze and you have ice on the sidewalk, that's probably going to be an issue that you'll have to watch out for. You know, as far as putting the, you know, the extensions out here or the splash pads out here, we're just basically looking to minimize that erosion issue here. Inlet protection. So all inlets within the immediate vicinity of your construction site have to be protected. So this includes any storm drain that can be affected by dirt tracked onto the street by vehicles and equipment. So here's where you're starting to look at, okay, how am I, you know, do I have to use inlet protection? Am I required to use inlet protection? Is this inlet, if I'm tracking dirt onto the street, if I track it out for a block, do I have to protect the inlets that are a block away? You know, those are the things that you gotta consider when you're looking at inlet protection. If it is something where, you know, you do have a storm sewer inlet that is a block away, and you have controls in place to basically control track outs or prevent mud from leaving your site, then you don't necessarily have to go protect that storm sewer inlet. If you are gonna have a project where you are gonna have, say, a number of trucks coming out of a project, say there's a big enough concrete pour or something, and trucks keep moving throughout the day, and there's a chance of rain and things like that, then you may have to protect that storm sewer inlet. It may just be an issue of, you know, we'll just protect that storm sewer inlet, but if you do put in the inlet protection, then now you have to maintain it, and so those are always things you got to watch out for. We have seen it as far as the track out and things like that, you know, in this area, and I don't remember which flood it was, but basically it was after the flood and time to take down temporary dikes. There was one project where the city pretty much had about 3 or 4 blocks of inlets they had to protect because they were basically removing the dirt from those dikes, and so they had to make sure that they didn't have anything, any dirt getting into the storm sewer inlet from that activity. Their last line of control, you do have to have other erosion and sediment control practices on site. They do have to provide adequate drainage. We have seen a number of issues with inlet protection devices over the years. Probably getting a little better now that people are more familiar with the stuff that's out there and how to use it and things like that. We were seeing, you know, you get like a silt sack full of wet dirt, and all of a sudden you got to try and clean that out, let alone lift it. You know, those are the things we're starting to see. It's like, okay, this is becoming more of a maintenance issue. And if it becomes more of a maintenance issue, then people are going to tend to not want to maintain it. And so now we're running into issues where things are plugging up and things like that, or they're just being forgotten altogether. But that's where we go, okay, if this is where, you know, if there's so much concern with the inlet protection, go back to your sites, go back to the source of the dirt that got into the storm sewer inlet and control it from there. They do need to provide adequate drainage. That's where we've ran into issues since the beginning, where they're not installed correctly, and so if there is any large rain event that's out there, the city will come out and, you know, have a tendency to open it up for you. Again, they can be removed if there is specific concern identified, and you have to document that concern in the SWIP. So if it is something where the city says you have to remove it by a certain date, then you're in your plan, you have to write that out, that we have inlet protection in place, or if we're using inlet protection, it has to be removed by this date per this requirement. We've seen it also where there was a project where a resident in the neighborhood did not like the inlet protection in place whatsoever because it caused flooding. Now, whether it was a significant amount of flooding or whatever, it ponded water. That individual went and started removing the inlet protection or opening up the inlet protection all the time, pretty much every night. If you do have an instance like that, that again is where you would have to go, okay, I can't rely on my inlet protection, but I do have to control any source of dirt coming off the site, so it's still protecting that inlet. At that, again, you have to document that someone there's something happening to this inlet protection that's outside of your control, essentially, and that you've identified it. So if there is an issue, that person did it. So,
Kevin, what's the dates for freezing temperature in the Bolster Fargo?
November 1st, and then when I usually send it out like a week before November 1st, and then I usually get them out December 1st. But then it's whenever the thaw comes, you don't know when that's going to be. It's different every year, so then I just kind of strategically give out notice.
yes.
When it's time.
And that's the other thing too, is when we talk about when I see things like doing inspections or going back to a site when the ground thaws or there's snow melt and stuff like that. That like Kevin said, changes every year.
Right.
It's, how are you going to predict that? And we can't even predict that. So we do look at other methods, or we use our, best professional judgments on when things like that should occur. We start, for us and looking at things across the state, we go to the North Dakota Ag Weather Network to see what the soil temp is there. They usually have a soil temp for bare soil and turf soil. This is usually out in the country and in different areas, separated by 20, 30 miles, something like that. But we'll look at that and be like, okay, here's kind of the general temperature across the state. The other nice thing is they started to include the frost depths, or you can determine the frost depths from those sites. So there we're starting to see, we're looking, okay, here, the ground may be thawed, but where can we determine the frost level to be in that instance? Like I said, the other one would be like best professional judgment as far as like, should you, and this is getting to inspections, should you start your inspection, should you go look at your controls, those type of things. You get a day, say, like, coming up here in a couple days, when the temperature is probably going to start rising above freezing, but it's still cooling down at night. Is that really going to start causing runoff in different areas at that point, or is that just going to be more losing snow to evaporation type of thing? Or is it something where the temperature is above freezing during the day and at night? So it's not locking up that moisture anymore. Now is it going to start running and melting and melting? Is this going to be an ongoing thing? And sometimes it's just a matter of looking out the window and being like, there's water running down the street. I think I'm going to go look at my site. So those are the kind of things where we say, yeah, especially in spring, it's like use your best professional judgment of when you're going to start looking at things and addressing issues and those type of those things. And here's just a photo of inlet next to a site. Nothing else much to say there. It is a lot of issues, but anyway. So as far as inlets, here's one that should be protected. You want to make sure you don't get or keeping the dirt out of the storm sewer inlet. again, it's tough to tell, but there actually is not anything in this inlet. So we want to keep that dirt out of the storm sewer system. If you're piling stuff next to a site, again, here's an instance where this storm sewer inlet should have been protected from this activity. So that's another instance where inlet protection should have been used. When you get into backyard inlets, that make sure if you do use controls back there, again, you don't have a flooding issue in this area, or that you don't cause a flooding issue in this area. The other thing is you don't want to put in something that could change the drainage pattern that's in this area. So in this case, I'm not sure what exactly, if the city has any specifics, or the cities have any specific requirements for these type of inlet protections at all. But essentially, we'd be looking at something that it depends on what you want to do, but make sure it adequately drains. Here may be an instance where, say surrounding that storm sewer inlet, maybe you have more vegetation, maybe you have blanket around it, maybe you put in a sediment trap around it just to catch a little bit of water to have some sedimentation in that area. So the main thing is just make sure you're not affecting other property at this point. So as far as we do get dirt into the storm sewer system, this is kind of what it looks like. These aren't big storm sewer pipes in this instance. But we can tell that there is dirt that has gotten in there. It has gotten into the pipe, so there may have been a rain event that caused it to move. What we're trying to prevent is something like this. And so this was an actual rain event where the inlet protection was not in place, and you can see the water. This is looking down into the inlet. You can see kind of on the sides, say on the left-hand picture, and even on the right-hand picture, where sediment is, or where water is entering the storm sewer system. But now it's starting to wash that, say whatever built up in the pipe or was on the surface, I should say, and starts washing that into the storm sewer system. Now this gets pushed out into, say, a local receiving water. And so that's where you're causing, or that is now the source of pollution to the water of the state. So we do look at these things. Again, we're looking at it as protective of those waters. We go beyond just, say, the Red River or the Cheyenne River. We would look at even things, legal drains can be places where aquatic life can basically propagate. So we'd be looking at protecting that, or things that could be, if there is a creek or something that is used as can be used for recreation, or being protective of those, or if it's an amenity that someone can look at and doesn't appreciate dirt running through it, we're pretty much being protective of those. Again, here's just an example inlet protection devices on this site. Vegetative buffers, okay, just kind of getting into what we talked about a little bit earlier. We do have it in the permit as far as what we would consider an adequate vegetative buffer. So it's essentially 1 foot width of buffer for every 5 feet of disturbed area that drains to the buffer. We have seen it. Basically, we use the work or residential building in the Red River Valley as kind of the launching point for this, because we would see that if you had the boulevard in place and the boulevard was seeded and things like that, then if you did have runoff coming out of the project, if there was any dirt in it, it would stop in that boulevard area and would not get into the street. And so that's essentially what we're trying to write for this one. Previous permits, we basically said you had to have a minimum width of 25 feet. And so that really kind of restricted where, what we could consider a vegetative buffer. So we took out that minimum width of 25 feet and just said, okay, you can have 1 foot of buffer for every 5 feet of disturbed area. And when we do talk about the vegetative buffer, if there is, say, we limit the slope of it. So we would like 5% slope or less, and the area that drains to the buffer is 6% slope or less. Now, whether it's hard and fast, we're out and measuring that at all, yeah, probably not. But that's kind of what we look at for, or what we've considered in the permit. Dense grassy vegetation, that's kind of what we want to see in it. Not so much a sparse vegetation throughout. It's pretty much going to be dense vegetation. Concentrated flows, they should be minimized running through that buffer. So here's just an example of one. This is pretty much dense vegetation. Again, they have the straw wattle in place. A lot of that's just kind of demarking where the project is, or the project limits. But here you can use the vegetative buffer as part of or include that in your plans. Maintenance. So erosion and sediment controls, they have to be maintained. So then this is pretty much, you can't just put it in and leave it alone. We do expect there's going to be some maintenance that occurs out there. We always talk about, it's always used as an example of inspecting a site and looking at a site inspection records and seeing that maintenance never occurred on a site for a project that's been through a number of storm events and all sorts of wind and everything like that. It's like, well, how could you not have maintenance after that? But so we do expect the controls to be maintained. It's not, we don't say that, it's, if there is maintenance, we expect it to occur. Here's how, or here's how you have to document that maintenance was done. When we do talk about maintenance, we do say it has to be done right away. And when we talk about right away, it's basically prior to the next anticipated rainfall or within 24 hours of discovery. The reason we have such a quick turnaround time is that we already are expecting that the project should have the proper controls in place, that if there is a maintenance issue on site, it should be very small. And it's something that should be done or be able to be corrected. If it's going to rain that night, be corrected before it rains or within 24 hours of discovery, or by the next day. Silt fence and fiber rolls, we say they have to be cleaned out when they're 1/2 full. If the fiber roll does lose 1/2 of its original height, then it has to be replaced. So as we see that, fiber roll either flattens out by just gravity or someone drives over it, or it is continually driven over. If 1/2 of that original above ground height is lost, then you have to replace that fiber roll. Inlet protection basically has to be cleaned out. When dirt builds up, they become clogged or do not work anymore. So here's just another inlet protection device that, if we're looking at, if you're being inspected and you're looking at this, or if you're doing the inspection and you're saying, is this in accordance with what the plan says it's supposed to be? That is something where you gotta look at and go, okay, is there any maintenance issue here? Should I remove this straw wattle if this vegetation is supposed to be my inlet protection? Is the straw wattle supposed to be my inlet protection? Do I have to replace that? So that's essentially what you're looking at. Vegetative buffers, got to make sure there's proper flow distribution across them. If the buffer is not working like it's intended to, then you would have to look at putting in other controls, such as, silt fence or a straw wattle, essentially. Dirt, basically it has to be, or tracking out dirt has to be minimized, and minimized could be as much as don't let people park on the site, or minimize how many vehicles can go onto a site and come off of the site. If it's something where, you could have people park, say down, in a designated area off the site, then go ahead and, say that they have to do that. You're probably not gonna, you know, for years we always said, well, maybe you can stop the deliveries coming on that day and this and that. It's like, well, that's never gonna happen. You're gonna have deliveries, they're gonna come on, they're gonna track dirt off. Well, if they're gonna track dirt off, then basically clean that up, or clean up what's being tracked off. Even if they show up when it's raining and stuff, you know, at that point, you kind of got to do the best you can. Not necessarily that you got to run out there in the rain and try and pick that up, but you know, do the best you can at that point. We do say that, you know, if you do have dirt on the street, basically you have to remove it from the street at the end of the workday, or shorter time period specified by local authorities. The permit also says if for some reason you cannot get in there, you have access constraints to get to a site to do any cleanup or anything like that, then that is also allowable, but you also have to document in your plan, this was the access constraint and this is why. So here's just you know, probably seen this before, basically just a gravel brought in and put down a pad for equipment or deliveries to come in, and then this gets incorporated into the project. But this minimizes, you know, you will have some gravel getting taken out onto the street, but it's easier to clean up than the mud that would get into the street. And you know, depending on how long this would be in place, these will pound out over time. So essentially the gravel just starts getting pushed into the dirt. And so you know, if you're planning this, it probably isn't going to be a long duration type thing that you're going to do this. If it is something where you're going to use it for a long run, then you would have to look at putting something like a geotextile fabric underneath the gravel to basically prevent that rock from pushing into the dirt. Here's just an example of equipment being on site. You know, they probably brought the equipment in, put the straw wattles down after the equipment gets there. You know, if equipment comes in, and if possible, if you could pull up the straw wattles before the equipment arrives, you know, go ahead and do that so they're not running over it. You know, it kind of depends on your site situation too. Like in this one, you might have, before equipment came in, you probably could have vegetation that's there as far as like weeds growing and grass growing and stuff like that. You know, once they bring the equipment in, starts ripping up that vegetation and stuff, then you'd be looking, okay, here's additional controls in place. But now again, that's all kind of goes to the planning and what controls do you have in place, what will you have to put in place after the equipment gets in. And here's in this example, you do have, you know, a silk fence that was in place, and then whoever showed up decided that this is how they're going to get off the site. In your pollution prevention plan, you have to basically show where all the exits are, or where track out could occur. So in this case, if your plan shows that the site exit or entrance or whatever is on the other side of the project, and that's where equipment's supposed to go in and out, then your plan is not being followed. And so this is an instance where we'll get into it, but employee training. It's basically where you got to explain to people, like, okay, here's what our pollution prevention plan is. Here's where the site exits are. If you're going to leave the site, this is where you need to go out. As far as anyone coming to the site, you would look and say, okay, here's silk fence that is down. You should be able to identify that this is down and be able to inform someone that this is down so it can be corrected. As the DEQ or EPA, if we were to come on site and see this situation, and your plan says that this is not where people are supposed to be leaving the site, then we basically say you're in violation of your plan. That you have an access that is not identified on the plan, or exit that's not identified on the plan. why don't we go ahead and take a break here? Maybe take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and I'll kind of keep going through the rest of the presentation and we'll just kind of keep going from there.
So you out of snow, huh?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started again. So continuing on with the site requirements for dirt. As far as basically offsite dirt, must be cleaned up. So paved surfaces, they got to be clean. Again, we talk about it at the end of the day. You're all used to having to clean the streets, or how often the city wants you to clean the streets. So I won't go too much into that. Other areas have to be clean. The dirt could eventually get offsite. And so that is one of the things that in the permit is the permit is designed to protect water quality, waters of the state. It does not protect protect property. So if there is something where dirt does get onto a neighbor's, from your project, were to get onto a neighbor's property, if it's going to stay on the neighbor's property and can't affect a water of the state, then we essentially say, work it out with your neighbor. But if it is something where, if it is going to rain, it got on someone else's property, say the next rain event or subsequent rain events can eventually wash off into the carbon gutter or something like that, then we say you essentially have to address it under our permit. But that is kind of one of the things with the permit. We're protecting waters of the state, not we don't prevent property damage. So here we got a lot of things going on in this photo. It's one of those that we put out there. It's like, where do we begin? As inspectors, we came across, say, a residential area, and you have a number of different parties working on a project or working in this area. So let's say you got one company on the left-hand side of the street, you got maybe 2 or 3 on the right-hand side of the street, different stages of activity going on. We would essentially start at the end of the block and work our way down the street, or start somewhere and work our way down the street. We would essentially try to get to every project that's here, or make contact with someone, or at least have some kind of documentation of what is going on the street. So that way, we're pretty much putting everyone on equal footing at that point, that you're all going to get inspected. So if you have a project that doesn't necessarily look, or if you have a project that is following the permit requirements and you have a neighbor who's not following the requirements, you could get inspected if the neighbor is not following the requirements. So just kind of keep that in mind. Because we have heard that, we've always heard it, is like, what about, I get inspected, what about that guy? What about that guy? What about that guy? So in order for us to basically end that conversation, is we're just going to inspect everyone, regardless of what their site looks like, and then just be done with it. When we've done that, we have had sites that say, if this site on the left-hand side was in violation and we were to do an enforcement action, we would have enforcement on that. But if you were the project next to them, just down the street, and your project looked just fine, then you wouldn't have an enforcement action. And so basically, yeah, we did the enforcement. We also inspected your neighbor. Your neighbor wasn't in violation, so there's no enforcement action over there. So, so anyway, just kind of keep that in mind, that even if you do have a site that looks fantastic, you're following all the requirements, you're still subject to inspection. For the most part, if you have your pollution prevention plan in place and you're following it, you have your inspection records in place, you have your erosion and sediment controls in place, you're probably looking at, if you're looking at a lot like this, maybe 20 minutes of an inspection with the DEQ. involvement is pretty straightforward. When it gets beyond that you know, if you have a site that doesn't look well, we may want to look at this site. Maybe we start going looking at other sites that you have around the area. How are you complying overall with all your work? Debris and waste, pretty much handle your debris and waste appropriately until disposal. Basically keep it stored on site. So, you know, if there is wind, it can't carry it away. You know, we try to minimize how much stuff blows off a construction site or gets off of a construction site. We see it a lot. You know, if you get into the developments that are pretty much on the edges of urbanization, I guess, where you don't have not really a lot of cover. That's where you're starting to see a lot more of those wind issues. So that's where you really want to control your debris. We do understand that things are going to blow off. You get 40, 50 mile an hour wind, something's going to let loose and something's going to blow away from the project, but we just try to minimize that. If you do have an instance where it does blow off and you can go and recover it, or you can identify that it is your stuff, then you know, bring it back and take care of that. Liquids and soluble material, so like your fuels, paints, other liquids, or anything else can dissolve in water, that's got to be properly stored. One of the changes, so EPA recently reissued their permit. It's not really going to affect what you guys are doing until we start opening up our permit and looking to see if there's anything to change, but they did make some changes as far as storage of materials and how it's supposed to be stored. Basically, you know, if you have smaller containers, it essentially has to be sealed. You know, if it tips over, it can't spill, same thing. But if you do get into larger structures, then you might be looking at secondary containment, or you would be looking at secondary containment. That doesn't really change what anyone's really doing. It's probably more following what everyone's doing right now. So, but that's one of the things that, you know, when we're looking at properly storing materials, just make sure if you do have a bucket of something and it's raining and it continually rains and it's filling up that bucket and that material floats on top, you know, eventually you're going to fill that bucket up enough that it's just going to flow over the top of that. So you want to make sure that bucket is either one under something that rain doesn't get into, or if it were to overflow, or you basically are managing that bucket so you don't have any issues with any pollution from it. Fuel, I'm not going to be too worried about it this year, the way prices are. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Wash water. So this is always a big one. Concrete wash water, tool wash water, basically has to be controlled. Can't discharge from your site. Can't go into the storm sewer system or anything like that. We say it has to be collected. If you're going to have it on site, it has to be collected in a leak-proof container or a leak-proof pit. If you do have a leak-proof container or pit, then it has to be cleaned out, both solids and liquids, when it's 80% full. There are, you know, if you don't plan on having any concrete wash water on your project, be sure to include that in the pollution prevention plan, to basically say that this is going to be hauled off-site to a batch plant, or it's going to be hauled away, so it's not our responsibility. That is, you know, basically you have an explanation of there is concrete here, there is going to be wash water will be generated, but it is not our responsibility. It's being taken somewhere else. That'd also be the same for any fuel that is being, you know, or any equipment that is on site. If it needs to be fueled, you know, is it being fueled by you? And do you have are you using a fuel tank and nozzle on site? And do you have the appropriate pollution prevention measures in place? Or is it a vendor coming in that is going to fill it up? And then that changes kind of the requirements as far as your plan. You would then, you know, basically say, here's the vendor is doing it. They're the ones with the pollution control requirements. If something were to happen, but, you know, even if there is a spill, we'll do our due diligence to follow up on it. Or is it something where equipment is going to be fueled somewhere else, off-site? You know, do you basically just say that equipment's going to be fueled offsite. So here's just an example of a concrete washout pit. This one, the liner isn't exactly perfect on it. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, kind of towards the bottom of that board, there's an opening where it could get out. Even kind of off to the sides there, you know, it looks like on the right-hand side, it may have blown out underneath the board. There's probably some concrete washout that's being used to hold the liner down on the outside of it. But anyway, it's an attempt. We would, again, like to see this to be leak-proof. And as far as like containments, as the amount of material in this, we don't expect it to be cleaned out at this point. We're, again, looking at 80% of this device being filled. So, however you want to mark off what that 80% is, you know, that's kind of what you want to use to be like, okay, as we're getting close to that, we should start planning to clean this thing out. But again, there's also the roll-offs that are out there that are used. There are other areas, if, you know, say there's a project-wide one being used or a development-wide washout pit being used, you know, you can take your washout to that, and then it would be another party's, you know, if you're allowed to dump there, you can use that, so. Fueling, manage your fueling to minimize spills or leaks. We know there's going to be spills, but as far as like leaks and things, you know, if it's a nozzle, if you can store it so it doesn't, say, drip outside of a secondary containment or outside of some kind of containment device, then that's what you'd be looking for. Any material, if there is a spill or any leak or anything like that, that's got to be properly disposed of. In the pollution prevention plan, we do have to talk about the type of material that you have on your site, as well as spill prevention and response procedures for it. If you do have a large enough project where you have a spill prevention control and countermeasure plan, then you can use that as your spill prevention and response procedures in your SWIP for your petroleum products. Other chemicals, you would just, you know, there's different ways you can look at that or follow that. One is if you have, and this is for anything that you're using, one is you can refer to the safety data sheet for that product. And that safety data sheet should say that if you do have a spill, here's how you're supposed to clean it up. Here's the proper procedure for cleaning up. Here's how you're supposed to dispose of it. The other thing is, you know, you just refer to the label as far as cleanup and stuff, you know, so if the label says, here's how you're supposed to properly clean up and dispose of this, then just refer to that label. Paperwork. So, that's basically the you know, overall site requirements and what we see as far as the work that is being done on the different sites in the area, as far as the type of activity that you're involved with. This will be more of the, okay, how do you apply for a permit? What is the paperwork that's involved with the permit? What, you know, how long do I keep those records, and what type of records can I have? So with this last general permit, when we issued it, and I should give a little background on the general permit. The general permit we issue every 5 years. So this one, the requirements of it were issued in 2020, April of 2020. So those requirements will basically be in place until March of 2025. And when it comes close to, you know, before that permit expires in March of 2025, we the DEQ have to go out and see, have there been any changes in federal rules, or is there anything in this permit that just didn't work, or something we need to incorporate into this permit, say from, you know, kind of like EPA's general permit, that is applicable to the state. And then with that, we would write up the permit. We would write up a statement of basis, which basically explains why we wrote the permit the way we did. And then we put that out for public comments. And so that's like a 30-day public comment period. And so essentially, anyone can comment, look at this permit and go, this is appropriate, this does not work, or whatever, and send comments into us about the permit. Any comments that we receive, we would then address, and then we would issue the final permit. So that's how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to go on a 5-year cycle. We've only administratively extended this permit once in the past, but essentially, since I've started, I think about 2005 on 2004 on is every 5 years has been the permit's been reissued. That's just standard procedure. That's just the way it is. As far as comments that we get or who comments, I mean, everybody comments. The different state agencies, home builders associations, the public, different companies have commented on the permit. They basically look at something and either ask for clarification or explain that this may not be an appropriate thing, or what is being done, or can you provide further explanation of why this is a requirement in the permit? So we're used to getting those. It is kind of interesting sometimes is doing a deep dive into why there is a requirement in place, especially for ones where, they may have been incorporated before even my time, and see why it's a thing. But anyway, that's kind of how the permit goes about getting issued. And then, like I said, we put the stuff, everything's in place for 5 years. And unless we're directed to change something, that is what is followed. But essentially the things that don't really change are the fact that you have to submit a notice of intent to us or apply for a permit. You have to put together a pollution prevention plan, a stormwater pollution prevention plan, or a SWIP, or a SWP3 or a SWEP, depending on where you're at in the country. You have to do inspections, and you have to record those inspections, the same with maintenance, and you have to incorporate best management practices or erosion, sediment controls, and stabilization in your project. So basically those 4 things don't change, or overall things don't change. As far as the application, so we do require that you submit a notice of intent to us. This is essentially your application form. We call it the notice of intent because there is a general permit out there. It is what everyone is supposed to follow, and basically the notice of intent means that you intend to follow that permit. The application has to come to us electronically, or the information on the application has to come to us electronically. The application itself comes into us in a little different method. I'll explain that here in a little bit. But basically what we're looking for is who's the contact for the site. So if you have a city project, it is, the city would be the owner on the project, and then whoever basically the prime contractor or the contractor is on that project is the operator. When you have, say a development and the developer submits the notice of intent, they may have a number of contractors that are working underneath them, but at least we have the developer as the contact for it. No matter what, we at least need the owner contact for the notice of intent. When it comes to home building, we've basically said pretty much the home builder can be the owner's representative in that instance, where they are the ones that would take out the notice of intent or be the contact for the permit. Basically staying away from that, unless someone is an individual is building their own home, we pretty much put the responsibility on the builders because they are the ones who are essentially, or would have knowledge of not what all the requirements are, but what the intent is behind all these requirements. Whereas an individual homeowner or someone who's going to just basically occupy a home, they're not going to have any knowledge or clue of what these requirements are, where to even start looking for them. So anyway, so we need the contact information, the project name. When it comes to city projects and commercial projects and those type of things, pretty straightforward who the project name is. When we get into the residential construction, we do permit by development. So if you are a builder and you are working within a larger common plan of development, then you can do a permit by that development. So you don't have to send us an application for every single lot that you're working on. You just adjust your plan to say that I've added this lot, I've dropped this lot off from my plan. We do allow builders to submit notice of intent for every lot that they work on. We don't say you can't do that, but we do give you the option of saying, limiting the amount of paperwork that you have to send to the DEQ by saying you can permit this area. We do ask for a brief description of your construction activity. So if you're, again, for home building, it's basically build a new home. For commercial projects, it's pretty much, we're going to have this commercial project. This is what we're doing with this commercial project. Street project's pretty straightforward as far as that explanation. We're looking for, the start dates, if known, estimated completion date. That's always that has changed in the past for some projects. So it's just an estimate. What's the acreage that you're going to disturb, and what's the total acreage of the site? And then where's the project located? So we do ask for, we give a couple options, but Latin long is basically a requirement that you have to include on the application. If you do have a physical address, if you know one, that'd be great to include that on there also. I don't know if you're going to really get into township range and sections, but that's an option. The one thing that we do see a lot of mistakes on as far as submitting this to us is the Latin long. For some, I'm not sure where everyone's collecting them sometimes, but we do seem to get a lot of, someone's building in, say, Fargo or West Fargo, and a lot of Latin longs are in lake cabins in Minnesota. So I'm not sure how that works, but just be sure you catch that. And the name of the municipal storm sewer system that you're going to be discharging to, if you are discharging directly to a river, include that river. So like the Red River or Cheyenne River in this instance. For the most part, putting in, you're going to Fargo or West Fargo or Horace's storm sewer system. And then you sign it, and well, I should say there's a couple other steps, but that's basically the information that we're looking for on the form. You don't have to send in your pollution prevention plan to the DEQ or anything like that. Essentially, when we're assuring compliance with the permit or assure you're following the permit and your SWIP is following the permit, that's basically during when we inspect your site. So we just want the application, we just want to know where you're located at. We do have two methods of getting the NOI information to us. For the most part, for contractors, you're going to be using what's known as the hybrid method of submitting the notice of intent. So basically, what you're doing is you're emailing the information that's on this form to the DEQ, not the form itself. And then you have to print off this form and sign it, basically get a wet signature on it and mail that in to us. It is a requirement under federal rules as far as how that has to be done. So that's essentially why we have to follow it or go by this method. So what happens is you would basically in the upper right-hand corner of that form, there's the new project button. You would press that, and then next to it, there's an NOI ID number, and that gives you a unique number. It's kind of like a timestamp for this form. And then you would fill it out, and then you hit the button that says submit by email. And then what that does is it pops up an email that attaches not this form to it, but the information from this form. So it doesn't attach a PDF document to the email. It attaches what's called an XML document. And if you open up the XML document, it basically looks like a bunch of coding that gets submitted to us. When you send off that email, that's when we receive it. That email goes to basically a pre-populated email address. It's stormwater@nd.gov. That's just a general email address that receives it. And then you'll get a pushback email saying we've received it and your project will be covered within 7 days. Type thing. That's not the end of what you have to do. You then have to print off this form and you have to sign it and mail in that wet signature to the DEQ. And then what we do is we match up the ID on the paper document with what was submitted electronically. We do that, or, you know, aside from doing that, we're federally required to do it that way. When you do submit the email to us, that is what starts your 7-day coverage clock, so that we're not waiting for something to arrive through the post office to get to us to start a coverage clock. So that's kind of where we use it. It's quicker to do it this way. If you do have, say, a city project or a commercial project where you do have an owner and an operator, and you need both signatures on this form, what we've said is what you would then do is, you know, if it's a city project and you can easily get both signatures on the form, then you just have to print off one piece of paper and both sign it and send it in to us. If it's something where you have an owner that is working, or their office is in another part of the country, and especially during COVID, when people were working from home, it was it was very hard or it took a lot longer to find someone or track someone down to get their signature, whether it's through another company's mailing system. So, but we still needed the project to move forward. So, you know, what you would essentially do there is after submitting that by email, you basically print off 2 copies of this form. And then you as an operator would sign off on the operator section, mail that into the DEQ, and then send the other one off to the owner to have them sign it and mail it into us. So that was also an allowable way. Because again, what we were doing is that NOI ID number in the upper right-hand corner was unique to this form. So then we would just match up that unique number to everything. The other way that an NOI can come into us, it's not a great way to submit it, is through our electronic reporting information system. For most contractors or work or things like that, this is rarely used when it comes into us, and I'll explain why. But this is basically a way that it's supposed to be authorized, or an authorized way to submit the information. The problem that we run into is that, you know, if you have an ND login account, or you can get one and they're easy to get, then, you know, you can start the process of using this. And so the ND login account would be like if you're reporting to WSI or any other state agency, that is a form, or that you could have that, whether it's for your company or your personal one or whatever. The other thing is you got to submit a subscriber agreement to us to get access to get into ARIS. So you have the ND login account, but you have to basically fill out this form that says, here's my login account, here's who I am, here's my permit number, and here's what I need to report for. And then you would wait 7 to 10 days before you would get access to ARIS. Problem is if you're looking for a permit number or get a permit number, but you need a permit number, then this form doesn't work so well because this option doesn't work so well because you don't have a permit number to be able to fill out the form. So that is where we push a lot of the contractors for construction back to this hybrid NOI. Basically, because you can fill it out and you submit it to us, and then we will give you the permit number, versus you have to have a permit number to begin with to be able to use this electronic reporting information system. We do have many entities that use it, so I'm not going to say that, you know, it isn't used, but most of those are facilities that report to us regularly, like either send us monthly reports or quarterly reports, or in some cases annual reports. One of the things I should point out, if you're going to use the hybrid form, there is some troubleshooting you got to watch out for in order to use it. So it is available on our website. You cannot fill it out directly on the browser that you're using. So you have to download this document to your desktop or your downloads folder or your tablet first in order to be able to start using the functionality of it. The other thing is that you have to open it with an Adobe software. So it was created with an Adobe software. It has the coding for the Adobe software. So you can't, so it only likes Adobe software when it's being used. So you can't use like Bluebeam or Edge as your PDF document opener to be able to use it. It'll throw errors to you. So just be aware of that if you want to use it. So let's see, stormwater pollution prevention plan. So it's essentially a pollution prevention plan for your project. If you have a SWIP or multiple SWIPs for a project area, they basically have to be implemented from the cradle to the grave. So when you start opening up the dirt or opening up the area and disturbing area until you have final stabilization, there should be a pollution prevention plan or stormwater pollution prevention plan in place. In this instance, when we talk about final stabilization, that could be an occupied home where someone else is going to be basically going to be doing the stabilization requirements, or the resident's going to be doing the stabilization requirements, putting in lawn or whatever, or vegetation is established on your end. When we talk about final stabilization, essentially what we say, in North Dakota, you have a couple options. You either have to meet 70% of pre-existing vegetative cover. So, and that gets kind of tough when the pre-existing cover was like a bean field or something. Then you kind of have to look at like, all right, here's, if someone is going to establish lawns or things, or have a kind of decent growth out here, what does this kind of look at for 70% cover? And so you have to have that before you'd be considered final stabilization to submit a notice of determination. The other option is if in areas that are considered semi-arid, and so those are areas that get less than 20 inches of rain a year, which is all of North Dakota. You can basically submit a notice of termination early if you have the appropriate seed base that will get you 70% vegetative cover within 3 years without any active maintenance. And then you can basically say that we can terminate this project early. I had a discussion with someone here the other day who said that is, you're taking on a lot of liability if you're going to say that I'm going to terminate my permit early just based on the seed that I have out there and trusting that I'm going to get grass to grow in 3 years. So I said yes, but it is an option that's out there. So we do have to include that. But for the most part, in this part of the state, pretty much everyone waits till that 70% vegetative growth or establishing that growth. So the purpose of the SWIP basically explains who has control of a site and the responsibilities of the site as far as pollution prevention and how that plan gets communicated to others. So we do talk a lot about the plan will say, here's what our erosion sediment controls are going to be. Here's our good housekeeping on this. Here's who's going to be responsible over here. Here's who's responsible for this. Here's who's going to be doing this for my project. I mean, it might be yourself, it might be your company, or it might, you might have subcontractors, or, say that this party is responsible for it. So, but basically it explains, who's doing what. You could have multiple SWIPs kind of working in one area. So say if you have a project and you're working next to another active project, both projects can basically interact with each other. They just can't really, they got to work together as far as what's going on there, ideally. But yeah, it's basically just, what is your pollution prevention plan for the project? You have to have a site map for the project. Basically shows where your erosion sediment controls are going to go, where you're going to store materials, where you're not going to store materials. One of the things that we changed, for those of you who've been inspected in the past, we always talked about showing where, say, like the porta potty is or the dumpster is on your project, and that the porta potty moved and it wasn't the same spot as was on your project. You always got dinged for it. Same thing with the dumpster. If it wasn't in the same spot where you said it was supposed to be on your plan, you got dinged for it. Well, we updated the permit in 2020 to say, well, you can either show where it's supposed to be or show where it's not supposed to be. So the idea being that you could have, say, So you have your lot that's being worked on and, or, that the porta potty could be anywhere in this area, but it can't be over here. You basically have to show that it can't be over here, but it could be anywhere over here. Same thing with a dumpster. It could be anywhere in this general location, but it can't be over here. That's what we're trying to get at. That way you got away from having to do, every time it moved, you had to go and update your plan. The other thing that we did a change on too with the SWIP was the amendment process. So in the past with the permit, we basically said you had to amend the permit or you had to amend your SWIP anytime there was something that needed to be changed. But we didn't say how to do that. We didn't say how often, what was allowable, those type of things. So what we changed in the permit is basically said in your plan, you tell us how often you intend to update your SWIP. So if it's something where, we're going to have things that change throughout the week, we're going to update our plan on Fridays or amend our plans on Fridays. That's fine. That way if you are inspected and it is something like, yep, we're going to address that. We change this, but our plan doesn't match it yet because we haven't amended it, but we amend our plans on Fridays. That is what we're trying to do with this permit. So that kind of gets into that narrative description of what goes on a project. Other things for the site map, showing any inlets, storm sewer inlets that are associated with the project, where any erosion sediment controls go in, those type of things. If you get into the development side and you're kind of showing who, you have your lots in your development, you're kind of showing which ones do I have control of, which ones don't I have control of anymore, that type of thing. So you're just showing what your footprint is. Site description, basically talk about what you're doing on the site. What is this type of project? What kind of soils are you dealing with? Those type of things. When you talk about narrative controls, you're supposed to have a whole thing where it talks about what is expected frequency, intensity, rainfall that you're going to get, all this stuff. Why are you selecting your erosion sediment controls for a certain reason? Basically, if you say that we are using silk fence or straw wattle or erosion control blanket in such a manner because it is an industry standard practice, then that is fine. That is what you put in. We use silk fence. Why did you use silk fence? It's a standard industry practice. Why did you use a straw wattle? It's a standard industry practice. And same thing within the protection. That way you're getting away from the whole, where you have to use this because, or we design this practice because we have this type of soil, we get this amount of rain and this amount of flow coming through this. And we're not expecting that for your projects. Just, we're gonna keep it simple. It's like, this is what the industry uses. This is what we're gonna go with. Operational controls. That's also going to be kind of your narrative of, how, again, going back to your spill prevention and response. And a lot of that, if you can you don't have to rewrite anything if it's already existing. If there's already procedures out there that you can incorporate into a plan, then go ahead and do that. Same thing with kind of your dust control, those type of things, handling waste. It's all a narrative of how are you going to manage this for your practices, and then that can translate from one project to another, those type of things. We've also put a lot of we've gone more towards electronic documents with this permit, or allowing electronic documents with this permit. So if you don't want to print this out, your SWIP out, if you just want to use it on your laptop or tablet or whatever, in a job site trailer or even in your local office, that's fine. What we do ask is that at least be accessible to us on site or in that local office. We are starting to see a lot more where we'll do the inspection, someone will have their tablet out and we'll look through their plan based on their tablet, or if they have a laptop in their job trailer, we'll just basically look at their SWIP off of that laptop. So we're not printing off a lot of things. When it comes to documents that need to be kept, it's kind of the same thing. If you have a scanned copy of your NOI, you can get that if we can view that electronically, then that's fine. The general permit itself is available on our website. So we say you do have to keep a copy of the general permit. If you have a bookmark to that general permit, then that's allowable. for keeping electronic records. As far as inspections, we changed that or updated that to, we basically said your inspection reports and maintenance reports have to be signed or have a method to verify that that individual did the inspection. So if you have, example would be like a work order ticket or a preventative maintenance ticket. If it's generated and it's given to someone to say, you go out and, do this. When you're done with this, you come back and you let us know that it's completed. Then that is basically the allowable means to verify that that inspection was done. Anyway, back to the SWIP. We also talked about, identifying who is responsible for the SWIP. So this could be, we see a lot of it where it's kind of by title, not necessarily that individual is responsible, but this person in general is responsible for it. Chain of responsibility, who, basically from the top on down, especially say like a city project, the city would be the overall responsible party for the project. The operator is basically that they're responsible for the things that are delegated to that operator. If you have a city and their consultants, then the consultant is somehow incorporated into that chain of responsibility. They're acting as the agent of the owner type thing. Getting into the residential construction, basically if you're like the home builder, then you are pretty much acting as the agent for that lot owner. So you're kind of like, we're the ones responsible for what's going on, or we're responsible for this plan. Good housekeeping. So we basically have to talk about how you're going to keep a clean site, how you're going to manage your litter and debris and chemicals, and if there's any tracking, how that's going to be done, dust control, those type of things. We do talk about equipment maintenance being one of the things that you have to discuss. For the most part, if you're not going to have equipment maintained on site, then just say it's not going to be maintained on site. If you do have equipment that is maintained on site, then just basically say, yes, we could have this on site, we're going to maintain, so we'll take care of that. Again, talk about your spill prevention response procedures. Employee training, employees have to be trained. It's pretty much project specific. They got to be trained annually as new employees are hired, or basically to ensure that the SWIP is being implemented. So if there is something where someone's coming onto the site, or there's someone new, you basically have to explain, okay, here's our SWIP. Here's what the purpose of the SWIP is for, and here's our controls. Here's how we do our things. Here's how we manage our, if there's a spill, this is what you do. Keep a clean and orderly site, that type of thing. If you're coming onto a site and they're not keeping the site clean, then if it's like something where you could have a tailgate meeting to say, we need to keep the site clean, that is considered training for the intent of this. But anyway, that's where you got to do, an annual training too. As people around, it's pretty much like, yep, we got to do the training again. Just talk about how you're going to manage your concrete washout and tool cleaning. If there is any dewatering activities on the site, how do you manage that? As far as your erosion and sediment controls, basically have to talk about that in your SWIP. If you're going to be, just talk about how you're going to use, if you are using them, sediment basins, silt fences, fiber rolls, buffers, those type of things. They all have to be on along the downslope boundaries. Basically managing that runoff as it leaves the site. Talk about your stabilization timelines. How are you going to stabilize the site if you need to? Those type of things. Also talk about your selection, installation, maintenance, erosion, sediment controls. So if you install it, how are you going to maintain it? Installation, the selection is pretty much, you could say that it's an industry standard. Installation, if you have, say, an installation guide, and you just incorporate that as part of your SWIP. So, how does the silt fence get installed correctly? How does the straw wattle get installed correctly? That's what we're looking for as far as the installation guide. Maintenance, we do call it out in the permit that anything that is similar to silt fence or fiber roll has to be cleaned out when it's 1/2 full. So there's your maintenance requirement there. We also talk about inlet protection. If you have something more specific as far as cleaning out the inlet protection, then you want to call that out in the plan. Some of the things there too is you kind of got to watch out when you're writing the plan. You want to avoid saying that we're going to clean things out as needed, because your as needed is different than my as needed. But you also want to watch out for saying that we're going to clean out something at like 50%. You say you want to, it'd probably be better to say we're going to clean out something as it approaches 50%. So that way it's like somewhere in this range, not quite 50% yet, but somewhere in this range, we're going to clean this out. So there's kind of an art to the way these are written sometimes. Talk about if there's any dirt that gets off your project, or if there's a chance that dirt can get off your project, or anticipate dirt get, whatever, just say how you're going to get that back onto your project. I had mentioned the 2-year, 24-hour storm event requirement. So basically your erosion sediment control's got to basically handle that type of rain event. And so then you just have to, if your plan's not meeting those requirements, then you got to update your plan to say, yep, this is how it's going to meet those requirements. And then if you work around an impaired body of water, specifically for like sediment or siltation or things like that, then you have to you may have more, you don't have really more requirements to deal with, but you just have to address that there's an impairment out there. For sediment and siltation and stuff, I don't believe there's going to be much in this area. Maybe in the Cheyenne River, if you go upstream a little bit, say West Fargo and Horace, but not really through town. The Red River is not listed as impaired for sediment and siltation, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. Post-construction pollution control. So if this is when they're going to be used, you also have to basically talk about them. This would be more on so the MS4 communities, one of their requirements that we have, or what they have with us, is that if there is any new development or redevelopment, they're supposed to have a pollution, like long-term pollution control for stormwater runoff incorporated into those things or into those projects. So if you do run into something, or even like a stormwater pond that's incorporated in your project for, say, an individual lot, those all get talked about in your plan, or just included in the plan. Again, maintenance of different things on site, inspection of the site. So basically, what's your inspection frequency? The permit says at a minimum you have to inspect the site at least once every 14 days, and after each 1/4 inch rain event. So you'd want to put that into your SWIP. The one thing is that if you do get a 1/4 inch rain event, that does not reset that 14-day clock. That 14 days is every other, every 2 weeks there has to be an inspection. Even if it rains the day before that inspection or on that inspection, you have to do that inspection. Signature, the SWIP's got to be signed. We do talk about having it signed by, we basically say the responsible corporate officer type thing, or a duly authorized representative. And if it is someone who is duly authorized to sign documents for the company, then that authorization needs to be kept in the SWIP plan. Any revisions, basically just talk about or keep those, a record of what was revised, and basically call out or describe what your revision process is. One thing to keep in mind is that all records, whether it's the SWIP, inspection records, NOI, coverage letters, all those things have to be kept for a minimum of at least 3 years after the permit is no longer needed. So, if you have a project that's ended, you submitted a notice of termination to us, then you have to keep that, those documents, all documents related to the SWIP, for a minimum of 3 years. Again, just kind of gloss over the inspection records here. Again, once every 14 days after a 1/4 inch rain event or larger rain event. Dewatering, if you're doing any dewatering, that has to be inspected daily. And as far as the records, you have to record your inspections. You'll hear it a lot that If you didn't record it, it didn't occur. So you always want to record your inspections to make sure that they're, that you can document that it's been done. We only expect inspections during normal business hours. So say if you don't normally work on the weekends and it rains on a Friday, and we expect you to do the permit says inspect within 24 hours, you're not required to come in on that Saturday and do an inspection. You can wait until Monday to do the inspection. So we only expect it during normal business hours. Same thing with holidays. If you don't normally work on a holiday, you're not expected to do an inspection on a holiday. If you do work on the weekends, or if you do normally work on holidays, then there should be an inspection record. We are allowing more for electronic records, again, for the inspections. But what you have to include is basically the date, who did the inspection, findings, corrective actions, or if you're still waiting to conduct corrective actions, you have to document that too. And signature or means to verify the inspector. So when we talk about findings and corrective actions, corrective actions don't necessarily have to be, we do allow timelines for those to occur, but we do understand there might be times when, there could be, something's not in stock to go and correct this item. In those instances, if it's not in stock, you basically just on your inspection report say, here is the item that we have being a problem. We've identified that this is a problem. We'll have to identify when we can correct this, but right now we can't. So at least you have that trail saying, yep, we've got an issue. We'll be able to take care of it once we have basically the appropriate things in place. Areas to inspect or where to go look. Basically, you're looking for any pollution or potential signs of pollution from these areas. So you're looking at your erosion sediment controls. Do they need maintenance? Is there any pollution issues? Is there potential for a pollution issue from this type of stuff? Same thing with chemical and storage and waste storage. Any track out? Is there any signs of erosion that you need to address? Dewatering, how does that look? Maintenance records. Again, paper, electronic records, but you have to record what was maintained, when did the maintenance occur, who did the maintenance, and basically have a way to verify that the inspection was done. So these don't necessarily have to be the same or occur at the same time as the inspection. If they do occur at the same time as the inspection, just basically say, yep, here's an item that was corrected, we corrected it, that type of thing. Transfers and modifications. So most of as far as working under the permits, when we're transferring responsibility from say one permitted entity to another, or from one responsible party to another, we pretty much handle it with a transfer modification form for us. As far as transferring from basically from a developer to a builder, or a builder or developer to a lot owner, you don't have to fill out a transfer form for that. We basically have said that the closing documents on that property is the transfer form. That way we don't get inundated ourselves with transfer forms or forms that come into us and for things that we don't necessarily need. We can basically say, like, yep, this is this responsible person, or this party is responsible over here based on these closing documents. And you don't have to send the closing documents to us either. So we're just basically saying that something's being in the world, something is happening. We'll figure it out later. If you are, say, it goes to like a developer to a builder, and the builder does not have a notice of intent for that, say, development or that particular lot or anything like that, then that new builder would have to submit a new notice of intent to us to get coverage. Termination for residential construction, it's a little bit different. If it's for any other project, it's pretty straightforward. Once you get that notice or the project is done, you meet the termination requirements, you can submit the notice of termination, ends that permit. When you get into the residential development or residential construction, because we're permitting on a large an area we're pretty much saying that, okay, when you're done working in that area is when we want the notice of termination. Or if for some reason you've stabilized all the lots in there, so say you're the developer and you've stabilized all the lots to meet final stabilization, then you can terminate the development permit. Not to say that there aren't going to be other permits still needed in that area, but you're just basically ending that responsibility. As far as lots being sold, transferred, one by one meeting final stabilization, then those changes can be handled in the SWIP. So you just basically update the SWIP to say, yep, we got this in place. This is who's handling this. So, and then, yeah, essentially once you've achieved final stabilization, then that notice of termination can be submitted to us. Records retention, I mentioned this, keep all your records for at least 3 years after coverage expires or is terminated. As far as the records that we're looking for, keep a copy of the NOI, SWIP, inspection and maintenance records, document your transfers, your notice of termination, etc. Anything that's really related to this permit requirements that you have to keep a record of, or keep that record for at least 3 years. So end of permit coverage. So conditions to end it, basically you've transferred a house to a homeowner, so you're not required to plant a lawn or at this point, but you know, it may be left to them to establish a lawn. But anyway, that would be considered basically a way to end the permit or end your permit coverage for that lot. The other thing would be just establish a lawn itself. Then that coverage for that lot, because it needs final stabilization, you can now end your responsibility for it, for that, the stormwater permitting aspect. If you have a project that's completed in winter, it's still required to stabilize the site. So you're still supposed to have some kind of straw mulch or whatever on it, hydro mulch on it. But you know, the SWIP should have accounted for this. But there is some things that if you do, so say if winter weather prevents you from stabilizing a site, then you have to put together a stabilization plan and say, okay, here's how we're going to stabilize the site, even if it is through the winter. You know, when we get an opportunity, we'll stabilize the site, but here's how our plan is going to move forward. If you get into, say, a situation where, you know, we're going to stabilize it, and we got 14 days to do it, but then all of a sudden it gets transferred to or becomes an occupied residence, and then that basically ends your requirements. So you don't have to do anything more with the plan, but you still have to move forward with the plan to say, just in case there's a delay, we have to have this thing stabilized, or here's what our plan is going to be. And then it's like, well, someone took it away from us. So there's always those things that occur in the winter. But just kind of watch that. That's where there's a lot of documentation that's going to start occurring at that point. So that's basically the paperwork stuff that's out there. Just kind of the common violations that we see is essentially 4 of them, where we break them down into 4 categories. One is not having a notice of intent or not submitting a permit application or getting a permit from the DEQ. So that's pretty straightforward. This is not the same as a city permit. So if the city has their own erosion and sediment control permit that's out there, this is not the same. It is a dual permitting process. We've known it's a dual permitting process for a long time. It doesn't seem like it's going to end anytime soon as it being a dual permitting process. So just be aware that you have to submit a notice of intent to the DEQ. The other common violation we see is just no SWIP. So if you've submitted a notice of intent for your project, or even if you haven't submitted a notice of intent for the project, if you know you're supposed to have a pollution prevention plan for that project, then you need to, basically have that. If you have submitted a notice of intent, one of the requirements of the permit is to have the SWIP. So if a notice of intent is submitted, there better be a SWIP somewhere. This is more than just the site plans. As I had talked about, there's the narrative part that goes into it. It's more than just showing where your erosion sediment controls go. It's basically how are you going to do other pollution prevention on your project. The other thing that we see is just no inspection and maintenance records. So again, if there is no record of your inspection or of your maintenance, and that did not occur, but you can keep the records electronically, or or you can have a paper record. But that is The last one basically is your related to erosion and sediment control. So that's basically what we're going to see a lot of too, is just there isn't any erosion control, there isn't any sediment control, there isn't any stabilization, there isn't any maintenance that's occurring. Vehicles are tracking mud on the street. So it all, if you lump it all together into a common violation, that is one basically, no best management practices. So some additional takeaways. Really, it's a lot of, how do you manage your sites? How do you go about doing your work? Where is this, what is the pollution prevention that you're doing on your projects? Then that basically just writing it down into your SWIP. If there's something where you're taking a tool that's already out there or it's planned, and incorporating into your project, that's fine. Again, the big thing is that this is, basically a way to communicate to basically not only the DEQ, not only the EPA or the city or anyone, but also to people coming onto your site. This is how we do pollution prevention on our project. This is why we have these things in place over here and over here. And coordination with subcontractors and delivery. It's always an ongoing thing. But it is just something you just got to keep pounding away at it. This is what we want to do for pollution prevention on our project, and this is what we want you to do for that. Ultimately, if you're the one who's holding the permit and someone is dragging mud off the street and say it's a subcontractor or delivery, you're going to still be responsible for it. Seasonal changes, there's always changes in the season. I talked a lot about it as far as like snow cover, winter stabilization, things like that. Other things that are out there. And I don't know how much you experienced here, but we had a lot of issues with the drought and trying to establish stabilization and different requirements there. How when you start getting into ending a project or getting to a project that's going to end in say June, July, August, what is that time frame? Are you going to be able to get grass to grow in certain aspects or certain areas, or do you have to look at another type of activity that you need to do? So, we always talk about it too for like larger projects, road projects where, say this time of year, people are starting to move equipment to get on projects. Maybe they're going to start moving some dirt. Well, what happens when there's road restrictions and nothing can move? You can't do anything on that project. You got to plan for those type of things. As far as the permit, we're looking for compliance, not perfection on a site. This is basically a permit to minimize the discharge of pollution off your site. Not to say it's not going to be, you're not going to completely have anything come off your site. We only protect up to certain size rain events. You get anything that's bigger than that certain size of rain event, then it's expected that you're going to have pollution coming off the site. So really, a lot of it is just follow what the permit says. Just document what, if there's documentation needs to be done, document that. If there is an issue that's on site and, you're addressing it, then that's fine. That goes a long way. So we understand that there are issues that are sometimes outside of your control. So, and I guess with that, any discussion on that? Okay.
Question.
Yes.
So, when there are violations, gotta get pretty serious to get to the state, or pretty much just up to the cities. For instance, I got a compliment to, the guys that we work with locally that, are pretty accommodating, and a lot of times let you know if there's something that's questionable, whatever. But you're talking about, one of the things I kind of wondering, you have a situation where most of the time we're using straw wattle protection.
Yep.
Or we get a notice to get them pulled up full winter.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I made sure you say that if we have to pull them up, we're still supposed to do some sort of erosion control between now and spring.
You essentially, yeah. If you were pulling up straw wattles, it could be an instance where, it depends on where the straw wattle is. So if it's something where they're worried about a plow coming by and clipping it, could you put it back a couple of feet? That would be another way to handle that for, in order for the plan to address that in the plan. When we talk about, kind of like the erosion control, because we're separating two things now, it's an erosion control and a sediment, control. So, when you have the sediment control, again, that can be moved back, because you're still looking at, if you're actively working that area, you can't really do your erosion control, you can't do any stabilization, because you're just gonna tear it up. So there is an instance where, if you picked it up, or if you had to remove it because you were directed to remove it, and you have something, say you set it back a little bit further, but you do have this exposed area, then you just have to document in your SWIP to say, here's this area, here's the exposure that we have. Because it's going into winter and we have to have, meet stabilization requirements or because it still is potentially an active area, you can't really stabilize it. So you don't have to worry about stabilization requirements there, but the likelihood of it moving off of your site is lower at that point. But you just have to explain that in your plan.
I guess, I understand. Maybe Kevin, maybe you.
I was gonna kind of break, that was one of the things I was gonna talk about, because when we send out our notice, I think there's a little confusion, and I'm probably gonna word it a little different, is basically that is for inlet bags. It's not for really the rest of the BMPs. And it's up to the contractor if they wanna leave that out there for the winter, so that at least there's something there when the thaw comes. But I think the way we state our notice when we say pull all BMPs, it's kind of a catch-all, but really it's for the inlet bags, because that's where problems can happen,
Sure.
We've had before where bags have gotten left, and then if we have a big water line break, and then we can't drain, and then it's just a mess. So that's the main thing, is to get those out. And that's why we say November 1, because we don't know if we're gonna get caught, it just takes, it's a process to get them out of all those developments.
Although, with the straw wall, most of the time you're seeing them put right up against the curb.
Right.
And when they're coming through with the plow, they're
It's
gonna
got-
go on.
Yeah,
Right.
that's why in Moorhead, we don't make them, but we say move them back or you're gonna they could possibly be damaged. And if they are damaged, it's your responsibility to replace them. So it's better to move them back for
Okay,
winter.
so if they get damaged, prime example, they get damaged, with all the snow we've got, especially this year, we gotta do snow removal on these sites.
Right.
Well, darn well, when they come in with a loader, those wattles, if they're down, they're gone.
Or they'll suck them through the blower.
Yeah. And at that point, there's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, so
And I'll
I
just say,
understand what we're trying to accomplish here,
right,
but when it comes right down to it, it just kind of comes down to two words: common sense. And you do what you can do, but there are some situations where there's not a whole lot that you can do.
right,
But I guess the thing that I keep on hearing, we try to quantify all this, and I know we're trying to protect the job sites, minimize runoff and erosion. But all the paperwork that's involved,
Yes.
the 3 years of keeping documents,
Yes.
what is the purpose of that?
The 3 years is basically what the federal rules say. So that's why we say, but as far as the documentation, that's all, it's basically, saying where is the liability on this? Are you responsible for this because, someone came by and, pulled out the controls or something? Are you supposed to be the one that's responsible for it or putting it back in? Are you identifying this?
But if
It's a lot of liability.
But for liability, if we've got the permit,
Mhm.
and it's our project, it's happening while the project is going on.
Yep.
Isn't it just automatic as our liability?
Nope, not necessarily.
You can document that you did everything you could and it was somebody else's. You had a neighbor that insisted on taking that out. Or, did you put the stuff in place and the plow took it out? If you document that this is what happened, then you have, cover yourself that I did what I could.
circumstances outside of my control are what causes this, non-compliance.
So, and that's in the permit a lot too, where there might be instances, I didn't go into it. But say you have dirt that gets off of a site. And we see it a lot for, for like road projects or pipeline projects and stuff. And the neighboring landowner says, I don't want your contractor on my property whatsoever. And at that point, it's like, okay, well, we have an issue where dirt got off our site. We can't really go address it because the landowner won't let us onto this property. What are we supposed to do? It's like, well, you're gonna just have to document that they won't let you on the property. And if it's something where they don't want you on the property because you either absolutely don't want you there, or maybe it's something where they're going into, we ran into, it was one harvest season where we had material go out into wheat field or barley field that was about ready to be harvested. And the landowner says, I don't want you messing around in my field until after I'm done harvesting. Well, at that point, you gotta document, okay, we're not going to go out and do anything until later, basically.
No, I understand those situations, and it would seem to me that it almost makes, of course, if it's federal regulations, I mean, that's trying to get that changed. But so often, I mean, the records that we're supposed to keep, such as a quarter of an inch of rain.
Mhm.
My God, I mean, the amount of time that's wasted coming to the job sites, okay, quarter inch rain, what'd you find? Nothing. Everything's okay.
Mhm.
And that's pretty much, I could just go over and over, and that's what I document.
Yep.
And so, it's just, unless if there's really an event that really needs attention.
But
Like I said,
the threshold is a quarter inch rain.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
So you're doing all of this monitoring or having documented just because you got a quarter inch rain, well, for crying out loud, I mean, that can be every other day.
Yep.
And so you're sitting and you're going to your job sites, okay, quarter inch rain, anything wrong? No, it's okay. And so, you know what I'm saying?
well, yeah,
But that's the federal regulation.
that's the
correct?
regulations, yep.
As far as the 24-hour period,
Yep.
is that midnight to midnight? Or is that whenever it starts to 24 hours later?
Whenever it starts to stop, whenever it stops is 24 hours. So if it stops and there's not a rain event that starts like again right away, or there's a rain event the next morning, let's say it stops at 2 in. And then it starts raining at 9 in.
That's two separate.
I consider that a rain event.
Yeah, and I have to go and verify what the permit says, but it's within 24 hours.
Which is the total 24-hour period.
Yes.
Yeah, so from our start time to finish time.
Yeah, and so that basically, once it stops, then there's 24 hours to go and get that.
No, and I'm not talking afterwards. I'm talking, where you're talking quarter inch rain period, but does that cause each, if there's two different
Oh,
storms?
no. It could be
So that's from when it starts raining, 24 hours.
That way, no, let's say,
24 hours, how much rain has occurred
right.
when it started raining till
Well,
that?
let's say we get an 1/8 inch in the morning.
Yep.
Clear skies, nothing else. Get an 1/8 inch later on in the day. Is that a quarter inch? Or is that two separate incidents that are no longer a quarter inch?
It's a quarter inch for the 24 hours.
Okay, yeah, but that starts at whatever time it started until the next time.
Yeah.
Just want to be clear on it.
Nope, that.
Because yes, I mean, we were doing inspections 3 times a week or whatever the case is.
Right,
Yeah, it's a lot of time.
Yeah,
When you're
it
doing
is.
80, 90 lots.
Yep, that is. Okay, good discussion.
As far as the wattles go, they can't even keep away from the mailboxes, so I don't know how they're gonna use a wattle.
I'll let you know on the Moorhead side is 1/2 inch.
Yeah. But we kind of, for us, it's just easier, like Minnesota, we just do our inspections weekly, not 14 days, and then quarter inch. So it's just, for us, it's easier just to go West Fargo, Moorhead, blah, 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 all the same. So it's not like I go 2 weeks here or a week here,
If it's a federal regulation,
Mhm.
how come North Dakota's a quarter inch and over in Minnesota it's a 1/2 inch?
Cause the feds are quarter inch and I think you're more stringent, right?
but separate zone, all right?
No,
Well, no, so when the inspection requirements,
have in the records, those are like your federal requirements. What triggers those is gonna be different, because EPA used to have, they basically broken it into two different types of inspection requirements. One was you could do it once every 14 days, and it used to be a ½ inch, but then they changed it to a ¼ inch rain events. Or you could do inspections once a week. Now, when we initially adopted the inspection requirements, we said once every 14 days. When the EPA reduced it to once every 14 days and after a ½ inch of rain. When EPA reduced it from a ½ inch of rain to a ¼ inch of rain, we went once every 14 days and a ¼ inch of rain. Now, other states adopted the once a week inspection requirement. So you would have to do inspections once a week, regardless of the rain event. And then there were states that adopted once a week, and then they went beyond that and said, okay, once a week in a ½ inch rain event. I'm not sure if Minnesota's done anything to lower than that.
Once a week and ½ inch.
Yeah, so it's basically what the state wants to, that has privacy over that program, wants to adopt from EPA. And so as far as what we try to do, I guess we used to be close to what Minnesota was doing, because a lot of the development was on this side of the state. Now it's kind of moved towards, let's see what other states in the region are doing as far as their like inspection records or how the permits being implemented. So we're trying to be a little, each state is different, but this is how we fit into that puzzle.
I like the ½ inch one. Maybe you can go building over in Minnesota.
There were a lot of people who liked the ½ inch a lot better.
I've got, just a couple of things for Fargo, I guess. We've got our permitting is pretty much done for you now. Residential, or if you get a building inspection, then you're just issued an erosion control permit. I think it's worked pretty well. Like $20, there's no. And then I issue the commercial ones. I think most everybody here anyway is residential. But what's important is making sure that I have the right contact, because that's where we send our violations through email. So if I'm not having the right contact, so anybody that I have my information, if you don't know me or want my card, to update that, or you can update it, because they're not gonna tell you in inspections when they permit you, they're just doing it. Because everyone that's a residential building a house is just getting permitted. So that's why they're just kind of took it over. So I'll just make sure that the right people have the email, phone number and name, because I know it changes often. And then that way I'm not sending the violation of the wrong people. Because the way we are set up, once you get issued the violation, you have 48 hours to correct. So I don't, we come back or do our reinspection. And we are weekly coming through the permitted areas, at least once a week, roughly. And then we do have a home builder's guide that we just kind of finished, and it's totally based off of the North Dakota home builder's guide, with the exclusion of, he talked about sediment traps. We don't allow those. Basically because we seed, when we bring the road in, we see that we're trying to get natural vegetation, hopefully. So I know a lot of you guys, if you have that, you're just punching in a construction entrance, and if it doesn't get disturbed, you don't have to put up the wattles, or whatever you're using. So if you guys, anybody wants to take this, it's just kind of really dumbed down version of everything Dallas just talked about. But I will say that you can get the North Dakota version of this, which is basically the same thing, except we pulled out the sediment traps. And I don't generally see anyone using those. Really? I don't know if they use them. Does Minnesota do you guys have?
They used to not allow it, but now they do allow it if behind the curb, if you can keep it lower.
Yeah.
So that's something new that we had come through with a new inspector, but now we have different inspectors. So I don't know, it kind of depends on the region inspector, what they get you on or what they not. But yeah, now we can. So now if you can leave it low behind the curb, if that counts.
So there's a worry about water cooling up behind that curb line then.
That's what we've had problems.
That's
cutting, and then we get settling.
right. That's one of the reasons engineering does not, or the engineering department does not like that option. But
that's the only really thing. And then the other, he talks about cleaning up at the end of the day, the work day, which is, Fargo is a little more like if it's excessive, we'd like to see a plan and something happening throughout the day, because that's the biggest phone call that comes in, because it's the most visible.
It is the biggest phone call we get, yeah, is tracking.
I think anybody can say that. It's anyone. Then the other thing is, this is the homeowner. You can get this on the DEQ website, the homeowner fact sheet. And we ask at closing, this is basically giving this to the homeowner when you close, is your responsibility to go over it goes. So this can be, I have quite a few of these I brought with too, but I would like to, we want to see this being handed out, because they don't have a clue about this stuff, right? So at least something so that they can understand that the best thing to do is hurry up and get your yard in. That's about all I really had. Everything else was pretty much covered, so if anybody wants to come and get these home builder guides, or either one to have, and then my contact info, if you don't have that, I think most of you guys have.
Is that something I could get as a PDF?
Absolutely.
Do those two things?
Yeah, well, yeah, the one is basically Dallas's. We are gonna make a homeowner that's more, just basically the colors of Fargo and stuff. But we want it to just represent so we can give out and have that. I think it helps a lot. So yes, definitely, if you want that, I can send it over.
Okay.
Any other questions, discussion? You want to call? Okay, well, that's all we have. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for everyone online for joining us. And I guess if you have any questions.
Lost my mind, because I wasn't there till the end.